The forest after the fight. Nobody moved. The forest had gone completely still. That particular kind of stillness that comes after violence, when the world is still deciding whether it's done. Snow covered everything. The ground, the fallen trees, the bodies. Thick enough to muffle sound. Thin enough that the blood had already started bleeding through it in dark, uneven stains. An entire rogue pack. Dead. No one in the hunting party spoke. One of the men had his hand on his sword and hadn't moved it in 60 seconds. Another was breathing through his mouth because his nose couldn't handle the smell. They'd all seen battle before. This wasn't battle. This was something else. Then the man at the front raised a fist. Stop. Because at the center of it all, past the splintered trees and the torn earth and the things it was better not to look at too closely, something wasn't right. The alpha was there. Halvard. His enormous black wolf lay curled in the snow. Not standing. Not pacing. Curled. Like an animal that has found the one thing it refuses to let go of. And beneath him, barely visible under that massive body, was a girl. Human. Young. Unconscious. She wasn't dead. Her chest was moving. Barely, but moving. Nobody breathed. Because this was Halvard. The man territories used to frighten other men. The alpha who'd ended a rival pack simply because they'd crossed into his forest without asking. The creature mothers in the eastern villages whispered about when children refuse to sleep. He'll hear you. He'll come. That man was lying in the snow, protecting a human girl. One of the hunters took a step closer. Maybe two. The wolf's head came up instantly. The growl that came out of him wasn't a warning. Warnings have space in them, a chance to back away. This was something older. Something that said, the next step you take is the last decision you'll ever make. Every man in that clearing stepped back. The girl shifted slightly in her sleep. A small sound, barely anything. And Halvard, the wolf of ruin, the monster king, the thing that generals feared, lowered his massive head against hers and closed his eyes. Like she was the only thing in the world worth being careful about. Someone whispered, so quietly it almost disappeared. Why is he? Nobody had an answer. Not even the man asking. And Halvard himself, if you looked at him closely enough, if you dared, looked like he didn't have one either. House Greystone, the fortress. The fortress of House Greystone had been built to discourage hope. Black stone towers, iron gates wide enough for armies, walls that disappeared into clouds on bad days, and most days in the north were bad. It sat high above the mountains like something that had always been there, carved out of the same rock and cold and silence as the land around it. The men who lived inside moved quietly, not because they'd been ordered to, because people who got loud around Halvard tended to stop being loud fairly quickly. He crossed the courtyard now, unhurried, not performing anything, just walking, and every warrior in his path adjusted their posture without deciding to. They didn't bow. Halvard had told them once not to bow. It slowed things down. But they moved, shifted their weight, found somewhere else to look. They called him the Black Fong in the south, the Wolf of Ruin in the east. In the northern villages, the ones closest to the border, they just called him the Monster King and left it at that. None of the names were wrong exactly. They just weren't complete. They said he'd never lost a battle, never shown mercy, never let a threat reach his territory twice. And they said his wolf was getting worse, more volatile, more difficult to contain. Like something inside him had been coiled too tight for too long and was slowly working its way loose. He was tall, dark-haired, silver eyes that didn't reflect warmth so much as absorb everything around them and give nothing back. Scars on his hands from years of fighting, real fighting, the kind that doesn't look clean afterward. Every movement he made was controlled in that specific way that meant the control was deliberate. Like without it, something would happen that couldn't be taken back. Humans were forbidden in Alpha territory. Everyone knew that. Which was why the girl sleeping in his chambers had quietly terrified the entire fortress since the moment he walked through the gates carrying her. The girl in his chambers. Her name was Eira. No one knew that yet except her. She lay near the fire, buried under heavy furs, still shivering in her sleep despite the warmth. Bruises on her wrists, cuts along her feet from running barefoot through the northern forest. Whatever she'd been running from, she'd been running hard and for a while. The old healer worked quietly, replacing a cloth on her forehead. Two guards stood outside the door because Halvard had put them there, and neither of them quite understood why. She was human. She wasn't a threat. She could barely breathe on her own. Then Halvard came in. The healer stepped back immediately. Not dramatically, there was no dramatic movement around Halvard. It was too dangerous. Just quietly, to the edge of the room, making himself small. Halvard stopped at the foot of the bed. He looked at the girl. His face showed nothing, absolutely nothing, except, and the healer saw it, and would spend weeks afterward wondering if he'd imagined it. For maybe 2 seconds, something in Halvard's expression went somewhere else. Somewhere that wasn't cold. Then it closed again, like a door. How long until she wakes? Soon, Alpha. Halvard nodded once. No one enters this room without my permission. The healer hesitated. He shouldn't have. He knew better. But something made him say it anyway. She's only human. The room changed. It wasn't that Halvard moved. He didn't. He just lifted his eyes, and the temperature in the space dropped about 10 degrees, and the healer heard himself apologizing before he'd consciously decided to. Forgive me, Alpha. But Halvard didn't leave. He moved closer to the bed instead, stood over her, looked at her the way a man looks at something he can't explain and isn't sure he wants to. His wolf had nearly torn apart 3 of his own men when they tried to move her in the forest. 3. Men he'd trained personally. Men who were afraid of nothing. His wolf protected no one. That was the thing. It never had. Until her. He stood there for a long time after the healer left. Not doing anything. Just watching her breathe. Like he needed to confirm it was still happening. It frightened him more than anything had in years. She wakes. Eira woke sometime after midnight. Her first instinct was to be very still. She'd learned that somewhere along the way. Wake up quiet. Figure out where you are before you move. It had kept her alive, twice already. Stone walls, firelight, massive room, nothing soft about it except the fur she was buried under. For one lurching second her chest seized, because she thought, the traffickers, they found me again. Then she saw the figure near the balcony doors, standing with his back to her, not moving, just there, watching the snow come down through glass. He was enormous, even just standing still. And something about him made the air feel different, like the space around him had its own gravity. She should have been terrified. Any reasonable person would have been. Instead, she noticed how tired he looked. The set of his shoulders, the way he stood completely alone, not aloof, not powerful, just alone. Like he'd been standing in rooms by himself for a very long time and had stopped expecting anything different. Something in her chest ached at that, which surprised her. He knew she was awake before she made a sound. You should rest. His voice was low, even. The kind of voice that had never needed to be louder to be heard. You saved me, she said. Silence. Just the wind. You were dying. Not kindness. Not comfort. Just statement of fact. Like the alternative would have been an inconvenience he'd preferred to avoid. And yet, he'd saved her anyway. Eira pushed herself upright carefully, wincing. She caught the exact moment Halvard's body tensed. He'd turned before she'd made a sound, some instinct pulling him around before his brain caught up. He watched her struggle with an expression that wasn't quite readable. It wasn't irritation. It wasn't indifference. It looked like concern. He looked away first. For the first time in years, the Alpha King found himself unable to understand his own wolf. And that, more than any battle, any threat, any enemy, was what kept him standing at the window until dawn. Days inside the fortress, what she notices. Eira learned the fortress quickly. Servants went silent when Halvard entered rooms, not pausing, fully stopping, mid-sentence, mid-step. Warriors who had the look of men who'd survived things other men hadn't still straightened when he passed. Even the air felt different near him, heavier, but she kept noticing things nobody else seemed to look at. He barely slept. She knew this because she barely slept and she could hear him. Footsteps in the corridor long after midnight, slow and unhurried, going nowhere in particular. Sometimes something else, a low sound, rhythmic and violent, echoing up from somewhere below the fortress. Training, or something like it. Once early in the third week, she saw him come up from the underground arena. His hands were covered in blood, not someone else's. He stood alone in the corridor for a moment, looking at them, before a servant materialized with a cloth and Halvard walked away without a word. No one asked. No one dared. But Eira understood pain. She'd grown up with it in the house. She knew what it looked like when someone was hurting themselves to stay in control of something else. Beneath all the power and the fear and the stories, and there were so many stories, Halvard looked desperately, quietly lonely. She found him on the high balcony one evening. Snow had gathered across his shoulders. He hadn't moved to shake it off. She stood beside him without announcing herself. He didn't react. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then she said, "You stay alone a lot." His jaw tightened, a small movement barely visible. "People are safer that way." She considered that for a moment. "You believe that?" He turned and looked at her then, fully, in a way he hadn't before. Eyes the color of winter light, cold and clear and much older than his face. She didn't step back. Something in him shifted at that. She could almost see it, like something that had been braced for an impact and didn't know what to do when it didn't come. His wolf felt it immediately. She didn't know that yet. Didn't understand what the brief tension in his posture meant, or why he suddenly put 2 feet of distance between them. "You should go inside." "Did I upset you?" No, that was the problem. Her presence didn't agitate the thing inside him. It calmed it, and he had no idea what to do with that. The kitchen blood. The cut was small. A kitchen knife, a moment of distraction. Eira didn't even make a sound, just pressed her hand against her apron and looked around for something to wrap it with. The scent hit Halvard from across the fortress. He was there in seconds. Everyone in the kitchen froze the instant he appeared in the doorway. The look on his face wasn't anger. It was something closer to panic, but filtered through a man who had never learned to express panic as anything other than barely controlled fury. His eyes found the blood before they found her. "Who hurt you?" The room held its breath. "It was an accident," Eira said. He crossed to her in 3 steps and took her hand. Not roughly, carefully, in a way that didn't match the expression on his face at all. His thumb moving across the cut like he was assessing it, like he needed to confirm for himself that it wasn't worse. The moment his skin made full contact with hers, his wolf surged. It happened fast, a wave of something that nearly knocked the human part of him clean out of the way. Possessiveness, so complete it felt like a physical thing. He felt his control slip by about half a second, which, for Halvard, was catastrophic. He let go of her hand like it had burned him. Stepped back. His breathing was wrong. He could hear it. Eira stared at him, confused, a little hurt, not from the cut, from something else. His wolf had nearly tried to claim her. In front of his entire household, over a kitchen knife. "Stay away from me," he said. He watched the pain move across her face. He hated himself for it instantly. He turned away. He had to. Because she was reaching for him, he could feel it before she moved. Some part of him tracking her constantly without permission, and if she touched him again right now. Her fingers brushed his hand. Everything stopped. The growl that came out of him was low, involuntary, and not the sound of a man who was angry. It was the sound of something that had been holding on by its fingernails, suddenly feeling the ground give way. He turned back, looked down at her. "You have no idea what you're doing to me." She didn't answer, but she didn't let go either. The fortress changes slowly. At first, no one understood when the shift began. Only that the fortress no longer felt entirely empty. The kitchens got louder. Not much. No one was going to start singing with Halvard one hallway over. But conversations happened at normal volume. Servants made eye contact with each other again. Candles burned past midnight because someone had forgotten to be afraid of the dark. Eira never tried to fix anything. She wasn't performing warmth or trying to change the atmosphere. She just existed there, the way she would have existed anywhere. She helped the elderly cook carry water because she was already walking that way. She sat with the injured warrior in the infirmary because no one else was sitting with him. She remembered names. Small things, but small things compound. One morning an older maid said quietly, to no one in particular, "It feels different here now." Like she'd only just noticed it. Like she was a little surprised. A younger servant whispered 3 days later, "The Alpha hasn't executed anyone in weeks." That one scared them almost more than the executions had. Because Halvard changing felt wrong. Dangerous. Like a fault line that had gone quiet. And the more peace Eira brought into the fortress, the more unstable the Alpha became around her. He started searching for her without realizing he was doing it. His eyes moved to the doorway whenever she was late for a meal. He knew, somehow, when she left the eastern wing and when she returned. His wolf tracked her constantly, effortlessly, the way it had once tracked threats. The warriors noticed. Fear spread through the barracks in a particular way. Not the fear of Halvard himself, which was familiar, almost comfortable by now. The fear of what happened to men whose alpha became obsessed. Obsessive wolves made irrational decisions. Obsessive wolves destroyed things. And Halvard's wolf had never cared about anything before. The training arena, his wounds. She smelled the blood before she found him. The lower arena was underground and always smelled like steel and effort and things that had been worked through rather than resolved. Torchlight moved on the walls. Eira stepped through the half-open doors without really deciding to. Halvard sat on one of the wooden benches with his shirt off. Fresh wounds crossed his ribs and shoulder from another session against his warriors, or against himself. With him, the line had always been blurry. His head was down. Blood moved in slow lines down his side. He wasn't tending to it, just sitting there with it. The sight did something to her chest that she didn't have a word for yet. "Leave," he said, flat, automatic, not even looking up. She picked up the medical cloth from the table instead. He watched her approach. A new expression moved through his face, not quite wariness, something more complicated than that. Most people avoided touching him even when he wasn't actively dangerous. Even his warriors kept their distance, moved around him carefully, kept their hands to themselves. Eira knelt beside him and pressed the cloth to his side. Halvard went completely still. Not frozen in danger still. Just stopped. Like her touch had interrupted something in him mid-sentence. The wolf moved through him in a slow wave. Not violent. Hungry. Possessive in a way that was almost gentle and therefore infinitely more alarming. "Did I hurt you?" His eyes came down to her hands. He was trying to understand something about this moment. His breathing had slowed and deepened without him noticing. Neither of them moved. The air between them changed quality. He was aware of her in every way. Proximity, warmth, the faint sound of her breath. He was also aware that his control was in a specific kind of danger he had no protocol for. He stood, abrupt, distance. "You need to stay away from me." She looked up at him quietly. "Why?" He almost answered. Something moved in his face. Then he looked away, and the moment closed, and he walked out. He didn't have an answer she'd be safe hearing. The collapse. The storm came fast. Eira was in the outer courtyard helping secure the supply sheds when the visibility dropped to almost nothing in under a minute. Snow and wind. The northern kind, the kind that doesn't care. Warriors were shouting somewhere she couldn't see. Horses were panicking in the stables. She didn't hear the wall go. She felt it, the impact, the cold, and then just weight and pressure and white, and then nothing for a while. The roar that followed shook the mountain. She heard it through the snow and the dark and the not quite consciousness. Something massive moving through the storm, moving fast, and then the sound the wolf made when it found her, not a howl, not a growl. The sound a creature makes when it's been afraid, and the fear breaks. Timber came off her in seconds. She felt the cold and the rush of air, and then an enormous warmth pressed against her side. Dark fur. Enormous paws careful around her in the snow. Her fingers found the fur without thinking. The wolf went still under her hand. Then gently, impossibly gently, like the word gentle was being applied to something that had never experienced it before, she was lifted. He carried her back through the storm like something precious, like losing her would have broken something in him that wasn't fixable. After the storm, his confession. She woke to firelight. His chambers again. The storm hammered the windows. And Halvard sat in the chair by the fire, still in the same clothes. Water darkened his hair. Scratches covered his forearms from tearing stone apart with his bare hands to reach her. He was watching her breathe. She didn't say anything for a moment. Neither did he. You stayed, she said finally. You were injured. Simple. Factual. But his voice had something in it. Something left over from the fear that hadn't quite cleared. You look terrified out there. His jaw tightened. He didn't answer, because denying it would have been pointless. She'd heard the sound his wolf made. That wasn't duty. It wasn't obligation or strategy or anything with a word attached to it. That was desperation. Eira lay there looking at the ceiling for a moment, feeling the bruises settle in. And she realized quietly that no one had ever needed her before. Not like that. Not with their whole body showing it. The thought frightened her a little. She wasn't sure why yet. The royal gathering, Lord Varric. The great hall was full of alphas, and Eira immediately understood why prey animals developed instincts. Every man in the room radiated power in the particular way that men did when power was all they'd ever been rewarded for. Conversation moved like water around stones, flowing around the silent centers, careful. She stood near the far wall and tried not to look like she was doing exactly what she was doing, which was looking for the nearest exit. Halvard noticed her discomfort from across the room. She could feel it the moment his attention moved to her, steady and specific, like a hand on her shoulder. Lord Varric noticed that. He was the type who noticed things. Eastern territories, cruel mouth, arranged in something that looked like a smile if you didn't look closely. He moved toward her through the room with the relaxed confidence of someone who had made a calculation and liked the odds. So the rumors are true, he said, coming to stand beside her. Conversational, like they were old friends. The Black Fawn keeps a human in his fortress now. I'm not being kept, Eira said. He smiled wider. No, my mistake. He reached for her hand, casual, like touching her was simply something he'd decided to do. The sound that came out of Halvard shattered 2 goblets on the nearest table. The hall went silent the way halls go silent when something very bad is about to happen, and everyone can feel it, but no one has moved yet. Every alpha in the room instinctively lowered their gaze. Halvard crossed the hall in seconds. Varric hit the stone pillar with enough force to leave a mark, and Halvard's hand was at his throat, and the sound coming from Halvard wasn't human anymore, not fully. The wolf right there at the surface, golden-eyed and absolute. Touch her again. A pause, and I will rip your heart out in front of your entire pack. No one doubted it. Halvard released him, turned, and when his eyes found Eira, and they found her immediately like they'd been tracking her the whole time, even from across the room, his face did something that unsettled the entire court more than the violence had. It softened. Narrator. Monsters were not supposed to love anything. That was what made them manageable. The balcony, his truth. She found the balcony. She needed air. He appeared behind her. Heavy footsteps she recognized now without looking. They stood side by side watching the snow cover the mountains, and the silence between them was charged in a way that was starting to become familiar. Why won't you let me go? The question came out quieter than she'd planned. He was silent for a long time. Long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because the moment you leave, his voice changed. Something in it cracked open slightly. I lose what little control I have left. Eira stared at the mountains. He meant it. That was the part that got her. He genuinely, completely meant it. The terrifying Alpha King wasn't keeping her here to possess her. He was keeping her here because without her, there would be nothing left in him keeping the monster in check. He was protecting the world from what he'd become without her. She stood very still for a moment, feeling the weight of that settle. And something in her, quietly, without permission, realized she was starting to need him too. Which made what she found the next morning infinitely worse. The archives, what she finds. The fortress archives were deep and cold, and smelled like everything that had happened in the north for the last 200 years. Eira was looking for something specific. She wasn't sure what. A name, a record, something to make the distance between her past and this place feel accidental. She found a name, a trafficker, A specific one. She recognized the description, the territory, the years. She'd heard his name before, spoken in the way people spoke names they were afraid of. Halvard had killed him. Personally. Thoroughly. Years ago. Eira stood holding the record with both hands and felt the room tilt slightly. Because the man who had once arranged the disappearance of her family, the name she'd carried in her chest like a splinter for years, was dead. Had been dead. And the person who killed him was the same person who stood on balconies alone at midnight and looked at her like she'd done something impossible simply by existing near him. She sat down on the floor because her legs decided to stop working. Lord Vaynor, the poison. Lord Vaynor arrived 3 days after the gathering. Older than the others. Quieter. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice because he'd learned that patience was more effective and considerably more cruel. He didn't provoke Halvard. He watched him, and within half a day, he understood exactly what Halvard's vulnerability was. Her. Eira found him in the lower library late that evening. He was waiting, which meant he'd known she would come this way. That alone made her uneasy. You still don't know what he is, do you? She tried to step past him. Did he tell you about the village? She stopped. He handed her a record. Old leather, burn marks on the corners. Details that were clear enough. Destroyed homes. Bodies. One name repeated on every page. Halvard Greystone. Her breathing went shallow. There had to be a reason, she said, and she believed it when she said it. She did, but the words still hurt, because needing to say them meant the doubt was already there. Vaynor let the silence sit for a moment. Your family disappeared near those same territories, he said. Didn't they? The cold spread through her chest all at once, because suddenly the distance between her past and Halvard didn't feel accidental anymore. And for the first time since she'd arrived at House Greystone, something that looked like fear moved through her when she thought about him. The fracture, he feels her pull away. Halvard felt it before anything else changed. He didn't need an explanation. His wolf simply knew. The way it always knew where she was in the fortress. It knew, suddenly, that the warmth in that knowledge had shifted. Gone cool. Small things first. She stopped waiting by the eastern courtyard in the evenings. Stopped looking up when he entered rooms. The easy quiet they'd built between them went brittle overnight. He didn't ask. He was afraid of the answer. So instead he fell apart in private. The Alpha had spent years surviving without peace. But now that he had tasted it, losing it felt unbearable. Warriors heard furniture shattering in the West Wing at 2 in the morning. The underground arena was drenched in blood from training sessions that lasted until dawn. Halvard isolated himself again. But it was different now. The isolation before had been familiar, something he knew. This was the isolation of a man who understood, for the first time, what he was missing. One evening Eira heard the roaring from 3 corridors away. Not rage. The sound was wrong for rage. It was pain. Pure, sustained, monstrous pain. She followed it anyway. The training chamber doors were in pieces. Inside, Halvard stood in the wreckage, claw marks in the stone, blood on the floor, the arena completely destroyed. Half shifted, ice gold, hands shaking. The moment he saw her, his wolf surged, not threatening. Desperate, like it had been waiting for her without being able to explain why. He turned away from her. Leave. His voice was wrong, broken in a way she hadn't heard from him before. Why are you doing this to yourself? He laughed. One short, shattered sound. Because I can feel you slipping away from me. She didn't say anything, because part of her wanted to run toward him, even now, and she didn't know what to do with that. The overheard conversation belonged. She didn't mean to hear it. She was crossing the upper corridor when the voices stopped her. Halvard and the council elders speaking quietly outside the war chamber. The claiming ceremony will happen before the winter moon. Eira went still. One elder said something carefully. Are you certain she will accept? A long pause. Then Halvard's voice quieter. She doesn't understand the danger she's in. Another elder. Once the bond is complete, she will belong fully to House Greystone. Belong. The word landed like a stone in still water. And suddenly every moment rearranged itself in her mind. Every time he'd said stay, every time he'd positioned himself between her and an exit without seeming to notice he was doing it, every protective gesture, every possessive stare. What if it wasn't love? What if it was just ownership, dressed up as protection? What if his wolf didn't love her, it just wanted her, and those were two different things, and she'd been too caught up in the warmth of being wanted to notice the difference. Her hands were shaking. She had to leave, before it became impossible to want to. The escape, the hunt. She moved through the sleeping fortress in the dark, heart slamming, every instinct screaming at her to turn back. She kept walking. The outer gates were partially open during guard rotation. Beyond them, the storm. Beyond the storm, something that might eventually become an answer. She stepped into the snow and felt, immediately, a shift in the air behind her. Like the fortress itself had noticed. The roar that followed shook the mountain. The wolf moved through the forest like something outside of nature. Trees cracked. The ground shook. Snow exploded where massive paws hit the earth. The storm didn't slow him. Nothing slowed him. His mind had stopped doing the thing minds do. Reasoning, calculating, planning. There was only one thought. One fact. Find her. For the first time in his life, the Black Fawn was afraid. Not of enemies. Not of death. Of the particular kind of emptiness that comes when the one thing keeping you intact walks away. Eira reached the frozen cliffs as the wolf burst through the storm behind her. The beast slowed, seeing her near the edge, then shifted, bones cracking, violent and fast, and Halvard staggered out of the change and into the snow. Bare skin, claw marks from fighting the transformation too quickly, snow covering his hair. He looked destroyed, not angry, destroyed. Why? His voice barely worked. I can't do this anymore. You were leaving me. The raw edge in his voice almost ended her resolve on the spot. Because that wasn't the sound of a king or a monster or a man trying to keep what he owned. That was the sound of someone who had never been able to keep anything and was realizing, again, that this was how it went. You don't need me, she said. He laughed. A broken, swallowed thing. Need you. His voice cracked. Actually cracked. You are the only thing stopping me from becoming exactly what they fear. And then, something no one in House Greystone would have believed possible. The most feared alpha in the northern kingdoms dropped to his knees in the snow. Please don't leave. Eira's vision blurred. Because Halvard did not beg. Not ever. Not kings, not enemies, not anyone. But there he was, breaking apart in front of her. For her. Her voice came out fragile. I don't know if you love me. He looked up at her through the snow, eyes wide open in a way they never were. Or if you just want to own me. Silence. Absolute silence. And for the first time since she met him, Halvard had nothing to say. The truth, his past. Snow fell around them. Neither moved. Then Halvard lowered his head. Not like submission. Like something heavy finally setting down. Narrator. For years the Black Fawn had ruled through fear because fear was the only thing he understood. But loving her had stripped away every weapon he knew how to use. You think I wanted this? Eira was quiet. Do you know what my wolf was before you? He lifted his eyes. Haunted. Ancient. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Violence. That's all it ever wanted. He stood slowly from the snow. He didn't move toward her. Still keeping the distance, even though it cost him visibly. You asked if I love you or if I only want to possess you. A pause. His jaw tightened. I don't know how to separate the two anymore. The honesty of that broke something open in her. Because he wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to say the right thing. He genuinely did not know. His wolf had never learned love without obsession woven through it. Only claiming, protecting, destroying. And the man standing in front of her, the one covered in snow, still bleeding from the transformation, looking at her like her answer was the only thing in the world that mattered, was afraid of that truth too. You deserve the truth, he said, and then he told her. Years back, before the name, before the fear, when Halvard was still the son of the man who ruled House Greystone, instead of the man who ruled it himself. The road wolves had been trafficking humans through the border territories. Children, families, Entire villages going quiet overnight while the other alphas looked away because humans weren't their problem. Halvard's father hadn't looked away. And one winter night, Halvard led a mission into the northern forest and found a settlement that had been hidden on purpose because what was happening inside it required hiding. What he found there stayed with him for the rest of his life. Cages, chains, children starving in frozen darkness, bodies that hadn't been anyone's priority. He didn't leave anyone alive. Not one. And the battle spread outward in the chaos. Fire consuming nearby homes, blood in the snow. And by morning the story that traveled south wasn't about a rescue. It was about a massacre. Nobody went looking for the complicated version. Monsters were easier. Halvard accepted that. The hatred, the name, because the children were alive, and that mattered more than what people decided to call him afterward. Then his voice dropped. That's where I found you. Eira's heart stopped. What? You were hiding beneath the ruins of one of the burned houses. The memories came up fast. Smoke. The smell of burning. Snow against her face. Something enormous standing over her in the dark. Golden eyes. Strong arms carrying her away from the flames. You were barely alive. He said, You kept crying for your mother. Eira's knees nearly went. The monster she'd spent years afraid of had saved her life, had been the one thing standing between her and a cage. You saved me. I tried, not succeeded, because her family was still gone, and the guilt of that had clearly never left him. I searched for months, he said quietly. By the time I came back, you were already gone. She stared at him. All of it rearranged itself. The way his wolf had reacted the moment he found her in the forest. The panic, the possessiveness, the obsession that had seemed irrational and was, she now understood, the opposite of irrational. His wolf had recognized her, long before his human mind understood why. You were always mine, he said. The words landed differently than they would have an hour ago. Not possession. Awe, like finding her again, had been the kind of impossible he'd given up expecting. You were the first thing my wolf ever chose over violence. Barely a whisper, but it held more weight than anything she'd ever been told. Eira's eyes filled. She couldn't stop it. And Halvard, who had faced down armies without flinching, tensed immediately, waiting for rejection, still expecting it. She stepped toward him. She touched his face. He froze beneath her hand, eyes closing for one brief, unguarded moment. The feared Black Fong, standing in the snow, looking peaceful. The attack, he chooses her. The war horn came before dawn. Halvard was moving before Eira had fully registered the sound. His body transformed with the speed of pure instinct, and his hand found her arm first, not rough, quick. Get inside the fortress. Now. The ground was already shaking. Flames at the lower gates. And then the scent hit him and everything his face had held for the past hour. The openness, the vulnerability, locked back down into something cold and lethal. Rogues. Hundreds. They hadn't come for territory. They hadn't come for war. They came for her. The Black Fong fought without calculation. No strategy. No positioning. Just power, unleashed completely. Directed by one purpose, keep her alive. The wolf tore through rogue wolves with terrifying efficiency. Blood on the snow. Stone cracking under massive claws. Warriors screaming orders that went unanswered because Halvard had stopped caring about orders. He was abandoning strategic positions across the fortress. His council saw it. The eastern wall was collapsing and their alpha was fighting his way through a courtyard to stay close to one human girl. One commander screamed, "Alpha, the eastern wall." Halvard ignored him, because Eira was trapped near the inner gates and the rogues were breaching and nothing else existed. In that moment, the warriors of House Greystone witnessed something impossible. Their alpha chose her over the throne itself. He crashed through the rogues surrounding her. 3 of them before they'd processed he was there. Blood in the snow. He placed himself between her and everything coming. There were too many. One lunged from behind. Halvard twisted to put his body between it and Eira, and the claws tore across his side instead of hers. Another attack. Another. He didn't move away from her. Even slowing. Even bleeding. She heard herself scream his name. Still he didn't move. until the warriors finally forced the rogues back, until they dragged him, wounded and barely conscious, off the battlefield. The infirmary, she enters the dark. The healer's words reached her through the door. The alpha may not survive the night. She stood in the corridor with her hand on the wall and tried to breathe. It wasn't the wounds. An alpha's wolf was tied to instinct, to territory, to survival. But mate bonds were older than instinct itself. And Halvard's wolf believed it had been rejected. The bond had formed, she hadn't known, hadn't understood what was happening, and her fear had fractured it before it could settle. The wolf didn't process that the way a human would. It didn't make distinctions between doubt and refusal. It understood only one thing: abandoned. The first episode happened before dawn. The healers didn't have time to react before Halvard's body arched off the bed, and a sound tore through the chamber that extinguished the candles. Gold eyes. Feral. Nothing human left in them. Furniture shattered. A healer barely got out of range. Warriors burst in and froze, because this version of the Black Fong didn't recognize any of them. Eira heard the roaring from 3 corridors away and ran. 2 guards blocked the infirmary door. "You can't go in there." Another crash. Stone cracking. She listened to the sound underneath the violence, the suffering inside it. "He won't hurt me," she said. "That isn't Halvard anymore." Her voice broke softly. "Yes, it is. The chamber was wrecked. Claw marks in the stone, deep enough to be structural. Medical equipment scattered. Blood in long streaks across the floor." The wolf stood in the far corner, massive, trembling. Fresh wounds split across its ribs from fighting the restraints. Golden eyes locked onto her the instant she stepped into the room. Every person behind her reached for something. Eira raised one hand. No. Somewhere beneath the violence, beneath the madness, the beast still knew her. But it looked afraid. The wolf looked afraid. She walked toward it. Slow. Barefoot against broken stone. Every step a decision. The wolf snarled. A warning. She kept walking. The enormous creature lowered itself slightly. Not to attack, she knew somehow. It was torn. It didn't know what to do with her being here. With her being real and close and not running. She stopped inches away. She could feel heat radiating from him. Smell blood and winter and snow still clinging to dark fur. The wolf's breathing was ragged. Its claws were cracking against the stone. Everyone behind her was waiting for the attack. She raised her hand slowly, touched him. The wolf froze. Absolute silence. Even the storm outside seemed to hold its breath. She pressed her forehead gently to his. "You were never the monster they feared." The sound the wolf made wasn't a growl. It was grief. The beast collapsed forward against her. Not in aggression. Emotionally. The way something gives way when it's been holding too long. She wrapped both arms around his neck. Gasps behind her. The shift happened slowly this time. Painful. Bones settling rather than cracking. And Halvard came back. He knelt on the broken stone at her feet. Shoulders shaking. Still bleeding. Barely conscious. Eira dropped beside him immediately. He looked at her like she was something that couldn't possibly be real. Then his head lowered against her shoulder. One hand gripped the fabric at her waist, not possessively. Desperately. Like the alternative was falling. And the most feared alpha in the northern kingdoms, the Black Fong, the Wolf of Ruin, the Monster King, broke down. Quietly. Completely. Human. After the fortress learns to live, the Black Fong survived the night. And somehow, so did the broken parts of everyone who loved him. The recovery was slow. His body had been pushed past its limits, and the rogue poison was thorough. Some nights the fever came back. Some nights the wolf grew restless from the lingering trauma, surfacing in half-dreams that left him breathing too hard and staring at the ceiling. Eira stayed. She slept near the window when he couldn't rest, pressed cool cloth against his skin during the bad nights, held his hand through the nightmares he pretended afterward not to remember. And Halvard, gradually, in the way that things are not sudden and cannot be, stopped fighting the comfort she offered. The fortress noticed. Not the dramatic kind of noticing. The quiet kind. Servants who used to move like people bracing for impact started moving like people who had somewhere to be. The kitchens made more noise. Warriors lingered in the courtyard after training instead of disappearing to their quarters. One morning, two younger guards nearly dropped their weapons. Halvard laughed. Softly, just for a moment, but it was real. The fortress had spent years surviving beneath fear. Now it slowly began learning how to live. Peace spread outward. Packs that had kept their distance unified under House Greystone. Not because they feared Halvard's power now, but because they respected what he'd sacrificed to protect people who weren't even his. Human territories reopened trade routes through the northern mountains. Cautiously at first, then willingly. Children played in the lower courtyards. Music came back to the great hall. The fortress built for monsters became, slowly and without ceremony, a home. Evening, the last balcony. Snow fell gently this time. Eira stood at the high balcony, watching it settle across the mountains. Months had passed. The bruises were long gone. The fear had quieted into something else. Something she didn't have a name for yet, but that felt permanent in a way she'd stopped being afraid of. Heavy footsteps. Familiar. Halvard stopped beside her. They stood there for a while without speaking. The silence between them had changed, not charged anymore. Not fragile, just comfortable in the way silence is when it doesn't need to be filled. You're staring again, she said. A slight pause. I like looking at you. Simple, completely genuine. He turned toward her. His eyes were softer than she'd ever seen them, not warm in an easy way, but warm in the way of something that had had to work to get there, and had. He reached for her hand, not claiming, not demanding, just reached for it, and asked, Stay. One word, everything in it. Eira looked at him, the man who had once been the most frightening thing in every story she'd ever heard. Standing in the snow, asking. She stepped closer until their foreheads touched. Only if you stop pretending you don't need me. A quiet laugh came out of him. Real, low and full. I will always need you. She believed him. Epilogue. House Greystone later. The fortress was alive now. That was the only word for it. Halls that had once been silent by necessity were warm and loud, and full of people who had stopped calculating whether speaking was safe. Eira moved through all of it slowly, one hand resting against the small curve of her stomach beneath dark fabric. The future heir of House Greystone. Behind her, at a careful distance that never quite closed, walked Halvard. He watched her the way he'd always watched her. Constantly, completely, but the quality of it had changed. No desperation in it now. Just devotion. The kind that had earned its right to be quiet. Warriors who'd served him for years still occasionally stopped what they were doing to look at him. Because the Black Fawn looked happy. Not at peace with violence. Not merely controlled. Happy. The specific kind that takes a long time to arrive and doesn't announce itself. You just notice, one day, that it's been there for a while. He reached her near the great hall staircase, put one careful hand against her stomach. His eyes closed briefly at the feeling. His mate, his child, the warmth of a wolf that had finally stopped fighting itself. Eira looked up at him. He bent down slowly until his forehead rested against hers. The fortress moved around them. Servants, warriors, children, the whole living world of a kingdom learning something it had never been taught. No fear, no rage, no one standing alone in a room at 2 a.m. trying to hold together. Just this. The most feared alpha in the kingdom was only ever dangerous, until he learned what it meant to love.